He's losing his closest friends, one by one, and doesn't know how to stop it. There is a particular kind of grief that rarely gets talked about openly, one that doesn't arrive all at once, doesn't come with a funeral or a clear before and after, but instead accumulates slowly, quietly. Over years, the grief of a man watching his circle of close friends shrink, one by one, without ever quite knowing how to stop it, or even how to name what's happening while it's underway. This is the experience facing so many Gen X men now moving into their late 50s and 60s, and the wise observer believes it deserves far more attention than it typically receives. A phone that used to ring with a familiar name now sits mostly silent. A group chat that used to buzz daily with plans and jokes has gone quiet, one member at a time, sometimes through death, sometimes through disease, sometimes simply through the slow erosion that happens when men who never learned to reach out first stop reaching out entirely. The wise observer wants to begin by naming something uncomfortable but important. This isn't primarily about the friends who have passed away, difficult as those losses are. It's about the ones still alive, still reachable, still theoretically available friendships that faded not through any dramatic falling out, but through years of both men waiting for the other to make the first move, until eventually there was simply too much silence to comfortably cross. To understand why this happens so specifically to men of this generation, the wise observer must look, once again, at the particular emotional toolkit many of them were given in childhood. Friendship, for many Gen X men, was built almost entirely around shared activity rather than shared conversation, working on cars together, playing sports, standing side by side at a barbecue grill saying very little. This kind of friendship works beautifully as long as the activities keep happening, but retirement removes the workplace camaraderie. Aging bodies remove the pickup basketball games. Health problems remove the fishing trips. And once the activity disappears, many of these men discover, often with real shock, that they never actually built the conversational infrastructure needed to sustain a friendship without it. Consider what happens when a close friend of 30 years passes away. For many men, the loss isn't just of that specific person, devastating as that already is, but of an entire category of connection they no longer know how to access. That friend may have been the one who always called, always organized the fishing trips, always kept the group loosely connected through sheer force of his own initiative. Once he's gone, the group doesn't just lose a member. It often loses its entire structure, because no one else in the friendship ever learned how to be the one who reaches out. The wise observer wants to be honest about something painful here. Many men in this position genuinely notice their friend group shrinking, feel the loneliness settling in, and still find themselves unable to pick up the phone and do anything about it. This isn't indifference. It's the same old pattern that shaped so much of his adult life, a deep, quiet fear that reaching out first risks confirming that he matters less to others than they matter to him, now amplified by the particular vulnerability that comes with aging when there's less time left to recover from a friendship that doesn't get repaired. There's a particular scene worth picturing that captures this experience precisely. A man sits alone in his kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, scrolling through old photos on his phone, a fishing trip from 15 years ago, 4 friends grinning at the camera, all of them younger, all of them still fully part of his daily life. He looks at the photo for a long moment. 2 of the men in it have since passed away. One moved across the country, and the calls slowly stopped. One is still local, still reachable, and yet somehow the hardest to call of all, because too much time has passed without contact for a simple hello to feel like enough. This pattern intensifies specifically around milestone moments, birthdays, holidays, anniversaries of shared memories, when the absence of old friends becomes impossible to ignore. A birthday that used to mean 4 or 5 phone calls from lifelong friends now brings 1, maybe 2, and the wise observer has watched many men in this position experience something close to genuine shock at how quickly and quietly an entire social world can contract, almost without their noticing it happening in real time. It's worth examining how this shrinking friend circle intersects with a broader crisis many men face around this age: the sudden absence of built-in social structure that work and parenting once provided. For decades, friendships often happened almost automatically, embedded inside a job, a kids' sports league, a neighborhood full of families, raising children at the same time. Once children grow up and leave, once retirement removes the workplace, the automatic structure disappears entirely, and he's left facing a genuinely difficult truth. Maintaining friendship as an adult requires active, ongoing effort that nothing in his life ever explicitly taught him how to provide. The wise observer wants to point out something particularly painful about how this pattern interacts with grief itself. When an old friend dies, many men from this generation attend the funeral, offer quiet condolences to the family, and then return home to grieve almost entirely alone, because the very people who would normally help him process that loss, his other close friends, are experiencing the exact same isolation, the exact same inability to reach out at the exact same time. Grief that should be shared collectively often ends up being carried in isolated pockets, each man privately mourning the same loss without ever finding out that the others are mourning it too. There's a specific tenderness worth naming in how this affects his relationship with his own mortality. Watching friends pass away one by one, especially men his own age, forces a confrontation with his own limited remaining time that can feel genuinely destabilizing. It's one thing to know, abstractly, that life is finite. It's another thing entirely to watch the specific people who shared your entire adult life disappear one at a time. Each loss a quiet reminder that his own name could be next on a list no one keeps but everyone eventually joins. This experience often produces a strange, complicated mixture of urgency and paralysis. Some part of him knows, with real clarity, that he should reach out to the friends still living before it's too late. And yet the same old fear of rejection, the same old discomfort with vulnerability can keep him frozen exactly when action matters most. The wise observer has seen this paradox play out again and again. A man fully aware of what he's losing, fully capable of naming the problem clearly, and still somehow unable to make the one phone call that could begin to fix it. It's worth noting, too, how this pattern shows up specifically in his relationship with his own adult children, who sometimes become, without either party fully realizing it, a substitute for the friendships he's lost. He may find himself calling his son more frequently than he ever did in years past, not purely out of parental affection, but out of a genuine hunger for the kind of regular, easy connection that used to come from old friends. This isn't a bad thing exactly, but it does place a weight on the parent-child relationship that wasn't originally meant to carry the full burden of his social world. The wise observer also wants to acknowledge how differently this experience unfolds for men who do manage to maintain even one or two close friendships into their later years. These men often describe those remaining friendships with an intensity and gratitude that surprises even them a recognition, arriving late but genuinely, of exactly how rare and valuable a friendship that survives decades actually is. The scarcity itself seems to deepen the appreciation, even as it makes the eventual loss of that friend, whenever it comes, even harder to bear. There's a particular detail worth naming about how this pattern shows up in the physical spaces of his life. A garage that used to host regular gatherings, poker nights, engine repairs, casual beers after work often falls quiet over the years, tools untouched by any hands but his own. The folding chairs that used to seat 4 or 5 friends now stacked in a corner, rarely unfolded. He rarely notices the exact moment this shift happened. It simply accumulates, chair by chair, gathering by gathering that never got rescheduled, until one day he looks around and realizes the space that used to be full of easy male companionship has become, without any single dramatic event, entirely his own quiet domain. It's worth examining, too, how this isolation intersects with his reluctance to seek new friendships at this stage of life, even when opportunities exist. Making new friends as an older man carries its own particular discomfort, a sense that it's somehow too late, too strange, too vulnerable to start over with strangers when the friendships that mattered most were built over decades of shared history that can't simply be replicated. This belief, though understandable, often keeps him more isolated than necessary, because the truth is that meaningful new friendships absolutely can form later in life if he's willing to tolerate the awkwardness of beginning again. The wise observer wants to point out something specific about how this loneliness differs from the isolation many people imagine when they picture an elderly person alone. He is often surrounded by people, a wife, children, grandchildren, co-workers, if he's still working, and yet experiences a very particular kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with the absence of people and everything to do with the absence of a specific kind of connection. The easy, unburdened camaraderie of men who knew him before he became anyone's husband or father, who remember versions of him that no one else currently in his life ever met. There's a tender complexity worth naming in how grief for a living, distant friend differs from grief for one who has died. When a friend passes away, there's at least a clear event, a funeral, a socially recognized process for mourning. When a friendship simply fades through mutual silence, there's no equivalent ritual, no clear moment to mark the loss, no permission structure for grieving something that technically could still be repaired, but somehow never is. This ambiguous loss, as some psychologists have named it, can be quietly more painful than a clean final loss, precisely because it never fully resolves into either connection or closure. It's worth noting how this pattern often intensifies during specific seasons, particularly around the holidays, when the cultural expectation of gathering and connection makes the absence of old friends especially sharp. Many men in this position describe a specific kind of ache each December, watching social media posts of other men his age surrounded by decades-long friend groups at holiday parties, while his own guest list has quietly shrunk to immediate family only, the old names from group texts and holiday card lists slowly disappearing year after year without any single dramatic explanation. The wise observer also wants to acknowledge the particular vulnerability of health scares in accelerating this awareness. A diagnosis, a hospital stay, a scare that turns out to be nothing, these moments often force a man to confront, suddenly and sharply, exactly who would actually show up if something serious happened. For many men in this position, that mental exercise reveals an uncomfortably short list, and the resulting grief isn't really about the health scare itself, but about the stark realization of just how much of his social world quietly disappeared while he wasn't paying close attention. There is real hope worth naming here, though it rarely arrives without effort. Some men, often prompted by exactly this kind of painful realization, do eventually break the old pattern, making a call they've been avoiding for months, showing up unannounced at an old friend's door, joining a group activity specifically designed for men their age who are facing the same quiet isolation. These efforts rarely feel natural at first. They often feel awkward, even embarrassing, precisely because reaching out was never a skill he had the chance to practice regularly across his adult life. But awkward reconnection is still reconnection, and many men discover that old friendships, even ones gone quiet for years, can be revived far more easily than the fear predicted. There's one final observation worth making, because it offers a specific, concrete path forward rather than simply naming the problem. The men who do successfully rebuild some version of their friend circle later in life almost never describe a single dramatic breakthrough. Instead, they describe small, repeated acts of low stakes, reaching out a short text instead of a long phone call, a casual thinking of you instead of an elaborate reconnection speech, a standing weekly coffee instead of an ambitious plan to rebuild everything at once. The bar for reconnection, it turns out, is far lower than the fear makes it seem. The wise observer's closing thought is this: if you are a man watching his circle of friends shrink, one by one, understand that the loneliness you feel isn't a sign of failure, and it isn't too late to interrupt the pattern. The same fear that kept you from reaching out for decades is simply older now, wearing the added weight of time running shorter than it once felt. But the phone still works exactly the way it always did. The old friend's number is likely still saved, waiting in the same place it's been for years. And the bravest, most valuable thing you can do with whatever time remains isn't waiting for someone else to call first. It's finally, however clumsily, being the one who does.